Good day, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Get Competitive, Insights into the Caregiver Trend Report. So right now, I would like to introduce our guest, Brandy Kurtyka from HealthHire and MyCNA. Brandy is co-founding CEO of HealthHire and MyCNA job, and a national caregiver recruitment speaker. Kurtyka and her husband were called to pave the way to provide the best care by empowering those that deliver it. Prior to MyCNA jobs, Brandy led digital marketing for the world's largest marketing research agency and served in various executive roles for both healthcare and recruitment companies in Chicago. She's on mission to arm healthcare recruiters with more insight about caregiver motivations to fuel the hiring and retention of a workforce plagued with high turnover. So we're thrilled to have Brandy with us today. Welcome, Brandy.
Hi there. Thank you. And hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest data-packed webinar. As Andrea mentioned, I'm the CEO over here at MyCNA Jobs and HealthHire, and privileged to have the next 45 minutes or an hour here to spend with you and talking about some of the latest trends. One of the things I always like to mention at the beginning of the webinar is I'm going to have a few polls today that are sprinkled throughout the webinar so I can help keep a pulse on the audience and kind of where you're thinking and where you're coming from. And this is your opportunity to provide feedback to me so I can tailor the session in real time based on where your business is. So let's go ahead and dive into the reason that you're all on the line today: caregiver trends, where the market's heading, and how you can get more caregivers through your door this year. For those of you that don't know us, I want to do a quick introduction of who we are. I operate both MyCNA Jobs and HealthHire. MyCNA Jobs is a job board that attracts millions of caregivers each year, and HealthHire is our senior living solution that delivers CNAs and resident aides to help reach candidates that you're likely not reaching through job boards today, while helping you cut some of your staffing spend. And I'm going to share more about how we can also help from a recruitment standpoint here at the end of the deck. But want to give you some context in terms of who we are, in addition to our actual recruitment tools, and why you're on the line today. We study caregivers on an ongoing basis to bring their perspective, what they think, what they care about, what's most important to them in evaluating our company or job. So we just did a study. We do an annual caregiver trend report study, and then we do research here on a monthly basis. And our latest big study really looked at a couple of different populations. So and of the folks that we surveyed, 81% are currently working, 68% are coming to the profession with 2 or more years of experience. The research always tends to skew female, because if you think about who our caregivers and who our CNAs are today, they're female. So primarily the voice of a lot of females that we're seeing today. 61% had a CNA or an HHA certificate. So this other percentage would be likely your resident aides that might be working in your buildings that don't yet have that certification. And I thought this one was interesting, and I wanted to add it here, as 22% of those that participated are a single parent. And I think that's just interesting as we think about walking in the shoes today of a caregiver. This study, based on an analysis over 1 million caregivers in our network here, we talked to caregivers via a variety of channels to collect this data, both online, talking to caregivers on the phone, through email, through social. So we're capturing a lot of information from a lot of different ways from all the folks that today you're probably sitting here struggling to recruit and retain. So let's go ahead and dive in. You know, last year, everyone was talking about the caregiver crisis and a shortage of caregivers. And everyone on this line already knows there's not enough caregivers. It's old news. We know there's a shortage. We know there's not enough new caregivers entering the field. We know recruiting is getting harder. And really our theme this year is we got to stop talking about it, and it's time to take action. It's time to compete. We've coined 2018 this year as the year to get competitive. And the word competitive you're going to see here on the line today is going to take many different shapes, from what your goals are as a business to what you offer caregivers to really your overall approach and perspective on recruitment. And we're going to touch on all of these different areas today. And to start, we're going to look at really kind of what your goals are and where your community sits today, just to really kind of set the stage. Because at the end of the day, a competitive brand is going to drive your recruitment performance. And what I mean by that is the more competitive you are, the easier recruitment's going to be for you. And we did an analysis on the company side, so this isn't from the caregiver side, but we also did an analysis of thousands of companies, and we built 5 classifications from the perspective of a caregiver to help executives determine where they fit and where they may be headed. And it's important, I think, to start here today because the whole theme is around how to get competitive. And before I share what caregivers want, it's helpful to think about, where you want to be, because at the end of the day, that's going to drive your recruitment strategy. So, in each of these categories, has a little bit of a different strategy. So let's take a look at the 5 categories of companies that we've kind of found in our analysis here. First, we have what we call our clean slate category. These are your brand new communities in town. Typically, they've been open less than a year. They're shiny. There's a lot of hype. There's good and bad about being new. The bad, 19% of caregivers aren't going to call a community or take interest in the community because they haven't heard of you or you don't yet have a reputation, which I think is really interesting. But the good is 81% are intrigued about the new shiny assisted living or community in town. And you have one shot to show your competitive edge is that honeymoon phase is quickly going to end. And so when you think today, if you're on the line, you're a new community, like what's your get competitive strategy? Like your strategy here is all about like building a new brand and how can you take what you learned today to do that in a way that is going to entice the most caregivers. Next category here of our 5 is we have weak brands. And this group is more well known than our clean slate friends, but they struggle immensely to recruit. Their caregiver offerings, and by this I mean what they offer to a caregiver or CNA in terms of pay, in terms of benefits, tend to be in that bottom third of the local market. And these brands really struggle to grow without major kind of investment in recruitment image, right? And more benefits and more pay and spending kind of concentrated effort on recruitment and retention strategies. And so what you get out of this, if this is your building today, might be a little bit different than those new communities in town. Next, we have our defender brands. These brands tend to be really known in a community. They have I'd say they're average in terms of competitive and what they offer. Like everyone, they struggle to recruit, but you know what? They might be meeting their business demands. They probably still struggle with turnover, but they can get enough people through the door. And like the weak brands category, here what you want to focus on is you want to focus on making sure that you don't dip into that weaker brand. You want to focus on making sure that your pay and everything kind of stays right there in the middle of the stack. Or you want to focus on making sure it's a little top of the stack so you can become an Olympian. Olympian, this is our 4th category here. Olympic brands are well known and well loved by caregivers. So these are the buildings in your market that tend to offer the most in terms of pay, the most in terms of benefits. Typically, they're innovators. They're in high growth mode. Caregivers and CNAs want to work for these companies. And really, these companies, the strategy and kind of what I'm going to share today, you want to maintain that competitive edge. You want to look at what I'm going to share today and say, okay, we need to stay on top so you stay as an Olympian. There's not room for many Olympians in any given market. And then our last category here is our what we call our fading stars. These are communities probably been in business for a while, used to be a market leader at one time. However, there's a lot of new guys in town. There's some Olympic brands, these clean slates that are coming in. And although they're well known, they're just a little tired. They tend to lack appeal. Their competitive advantage is fading a little bit. And these communities, what my recommendation here is like take what you're going to see today and think about like how can you differentiate, show that you're still relevant, show that you're a good established employer of choice and you're established in your community. So that's where I want to start. I just kind of want everyone to take their pen out and say, okay, where am I, or where do I want to be? And all the slides that I'm going to show you here on out, you can drive back to what's in your strategy here today that you're going to build after the call. So now into some of the research from caregivers and the perspective of a caregiver. I always like to start here. Are caregivers sitting in and waiting for your call? No, they're not. Caregivers are not sitting there waiting for their phone to ring, looking for that next job. Their phone is ringing off the hook, right? So caregivers told us this year, and this number continues to hold strong, that on average, they get about 3 calls a week for work. This number is just holding strong. So think about what this means for a minute. It means every single week, both the caregivers that you're trying to recruit and the caregivers that are working for you today, their phone is ringing off the hook from other employers. And, chances are high while you're on this webinar, one of your top caregivers is getting a call from your competitor down the street. And I think this is just really important to keep in mind, that it's not just you on their voicemail this year. And in fact, 65% of caregivers told us that they're always looking for a better job, while 97% say they're open to another job opportunity at any given time. Stop and think about this one for a minute. Nearly 100% of caregivers have told us they're open to a new job. This is so wildly different from many other industries, and it's important to keep in mind from both a recruitment and a retention standpoint. There's little loyalty because there doesn't need to be. Caregivers can literally get a job anywhere in the country right now. And 32% of them say that they interview with another company every single month. So this means they hop in the car, on a bus, on a train, resume in hand, walk into the office of one of your competitors just to explore and see if they have something better to offer. So what's interesting to me about this, if I were sitting in your shoes, is, caregivers and CNAs, they're constantly evaluating how competitive your offering is compared to every other company in town, right? And it's not just other assisted living, and I'm going to spend some more time on this one in a minute and talk about what I mean, but they're constantly evaluating who you are. And I'm really glad this is a webinar and not a live session, and you can't throw something at me through the phone today, because this one was really interesting to me. I was struck by this. 30% of caregivers came back and told us that where do they search for work? They search for work while they're at work. So they clock in with you. If it's home care while their client naps, caregivers are always in job hunting mode. That's what this tells me. Who pays more? Who can help pay for additional training or school? Who offers better benefits? Who has a case closer to my house? Who has the hours I want? Even though they work for you today, you're still being evaluated. And again, this isn't because they're bad people. Think about it. 22% are single parents. It's 91% females. Primarily, these are, minimum wage jobs. A lot of caregivers have a couple of kiddos. Like, they're trying to build a career and stay in the profession if they can stay in the profession. And there's a lot of moving pieces there. And so this means they're constantly evaluating you. So I think that's really key to keep in mind from a market perspective. So we've talked a little bit about now how just in-demand caregivers are. Next, I want to talk about your specific market. And do you know how big your market is? And what I mean by that is, do you have an understanding today of how many available caregivers or CNAs, whatever that requirement is that you need, reside within your specific territory, right? So like how many caregivers, live within a driving distance to your building. And this is really important because each market is so unique. If you're recruiting in downtown Philadelphia, you have more candidates to choose from than if you're in Des Moines, Iowa. And you want to start thinking about what this looks like and what your market looks like before you start introducing recruitment strategies that are going to start drastically cutting this market. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So let's just say you only have part-time jobs available right now. Well, 35% of caregivers told us they want full-time jobs. This means you could have lots of potential caregivers that are looking for like different type of employment right now. Your market of potential candidates just got smaller, right? So you're cutting your market here. Next, we asked caregivers what types of companies they want to work for. And here's what they said. When we said, okay, where do you want to work? 7% of caregivers said, I want to work for a nursing home. 18% said privately for a family. 22% said assisted living, and I know that's the bulk of you on the line today. 26% said a home care agency, and 27% said a hospital. This is really interesting. Think about what this just did to your market. So let's say you're sitting in Des Moines, Iowa, and you say, okay, there's 2,000 CNAs in Des Moines, Iowa. Only 22% actually want to work in assisted living. Doesn't mean you can't capture that other percentage, but it does mean you need to work harder this year to catch the attention of a caregiver that may want to work someplace else and tell your story on why they should work for you. And at the end of the deck, I'm going to talk about how my team and my CNA Jobs and HealthHire can help you do that. Here's what else we learned. 72% of caregivers told us that they've worked retail. 63% of caregivers have worked fast food. And when you think about who your competitors are in terms of who can hire your caregivers, it's no longer just about the assisted living next door or the home care agency next door, or the hospital down the street. It's retail, guys. It's fast food. And in fact, 80% of caregivers told us in our latest study that they prefer to work for one company if they can get the hours they want. And it's often easier for them to get the hours they want by working retail and fast food. And I think that's just fascinating insight. It's not just about who traditionally you thought who your competitors were before. And that's one of the biggest key points we're trying to really drive home this year and kind of open up the minds of folks thinking about who's taking your caregivers and who's hiring your caregivers and what you can do about it. So let's stop and assess. This is where if you're taking notes today during the webinar, I take out a pen and paper and write down these questions. So after the webinar, you can challenge yourself to kind of think through these a bit. Are you attracting caregivers today from nursing homes, hospital, and home care? If not, could you? We see, again, I'm going to talk to assisted living. I know that's the majority of you online today. We see a lot of assisted living that says, well, you need to have experience working in assisted living. Well, only 22% want to work in assisted living. Could you take someone from home care, from nursing homes, or from another healthcare type of position and train them up and teach them how your building operates? Do you know how to sell someone that's working, let's say, retail? So we know lots of caregivers are coming in from retail. Do you know how to sell a person that you think has a complete heart of gold on how it is to come and work for your organization in senior care? Do you have the training in place to do so? And I was just sharing with Andrea before we started the webinar here. We really see two schools of thought when it comes to training, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. There's some schools of thought that's like, no, I don't want to invest in training. No, I don't want to help people become a CNA because they're going to just leave me and they're going to go someplace else. And you're right, they aren't going to stay with you forever and they are going to go someplace else. We see other companies that are really innovating and saying, you know what, I know they're going to leave me. I know they're going to go someplace else, but you know what? I can get a really good person and I can typically get them to commit to me for 6, 9, 12 months, whatever it may be. And there's not enough available talent in their market. So they're doing it. They're training. They're going in and trying to bring these other people in. And I think it's just interesting to think about, if you don't have enough people in your market, how can you be part of the story of getting more people in your community into the field? Because opening yourself up to just as many caregivers as you can is a theme today. 2018 isn't about excluding caregivers, but it's about including as many caregivers as you can. You don't want to make your market smaller than it has to be. This is where we're seeing companies lose, and we're seeing companies win that think a little bit more holistically about opening this up. One of the things I found interesting was, did you know that 37% of caregivers report having less than 1 year of experience today? Did you also know that many communities today say they require a year or more of experience. It's just interesting. So if you don't have enough caregivers in your community and you're requiring a year of experience, which experience is important, training is important, but you're eliminating 37% of your market. And if there's not enough people, can you do this? Experience is important, but knowledge is more important. Could you train someone with less experience to help get the caregivers through your door? I think it's something that's interesting to explore. For some of us, it makes sense. For some of us, it doesn't. But I think it's a good question and a good dialogue to have internally. And here's another way of looking at this: is everyone on the line today is sitting somewhere in the country with people passing by your office right now, or people passing by your assisted living community right now. Who's passing by right now that doesn't even know what a caregiver is? Who's passing by to go work at the mall? Who's passing by to go work at McDonald's? These are people that over time you could be missing. And when we think about the shortage and how the shortage is going to get worse, it's not going to get better. I tell you guys, I think we're going to be doing another webinar in a year, and we're going to be in a worse spot than we are today. Could you think differently here? And I kind of want to leave everyone on the webinar with that thought today. Again, this is the year of thinking about assisting caregivers to get through your recruitment process and not just eliminating. Because if we keep doing things the way that we have been, we're not going to have enough caregivers to meet your hiring goals, grow your business, operate your buildings. And here's an example of that. 44% of caregivers told us that they have an active CPR certificate. Most communities require this. So stop and think about how you could use this as a strategy for a minute, going back to those categories and kind of where you sit as a building. Like if you have a hard requirement that you must have this to come in, are you eliminating them? Or do you have some Olympians in town that are like, no problem, you don't have this, let me help you get it. Let me help you train. Because only 45% of caregivers told us that their certificate, their CPR certificate, was paid for by a company. So think about, it's not always about just higher wages or offering more. Sometimes it is. But here's one little thing that you could do to help differentiate and to help yourself stand out a bit. We say make it easier on caregivers this year. 62% of caregivers report their employers pay for their medical testing, which is required for them to start work. If you fall into the 40% of companies that don't pay for medical testing, could you? If not, you're potentially leaving 40% of caregivers on the table. We chatted about this one a little bit, and I want to hit on it again. Do you require a CNA certificate? We all want CNAs. There's not enough. What's really cool? 80% of all caregivers that don't have a CNA reported they would get one if their company helped them pay for it. And I recognize this isn't always easy. It costs money. It takes time. But I also know how much money and time it takes if you don't have enough of the people that you need working in your building. So I think this is really, really interesting. Again, training. One thing we found interesting in our last study, given memory loss is really on the rise, is that 83% of caregivers reported to us that they were working with memory loss patients, yet only 65% reported having training to do so. Again, I think just interesting. This is about training. This is about development. This is about standing out wherever you are, wherever you stand in terms of your category, kind of where you want to be as a building. This is something that's interesting. So again, I want to stop here after this section, take your pen out, see where you could, potentially evaluate being more competitive this year. Think about if you're eliminating potentially good candidates because of strict requirements. And maybe those strict requirements worked before, but they're not working anymore, or it's starting to get just harder and harder and harder to recruit with those requirements. Think about if your requirements are really requirements or if they're preferences. And again, it's a dialogue. Could you train? Are there ways today that you can assist a caregiver versus, eliminating them to attract more talent and get them through your process? So now let's move to pay. And pay isn't everything, but it's a major driver. And we have the privilege of having data across millions of caregivers at a hyper-local zip code level of what they actually want to make this year around where you're located. I'm going to share those results with you. Nationally, when we ask caregivers what they'd be willing to work for, the average desired wage nationwide for a caregiver without a certificate is $11.37, and for a CNA, it's $12.11. And here's the data, at the state level. I'm going to tell you, nationwide pay data is interesting. State level pay data is interesting. And you can see that up here on the screen that I'm going to leave up for a minute. But what's more interesting is kind of what the data is where your buildings are. And I'm going to show you how to get to that data here in a minute. But essentially what you can see here on the state slide is if the number is in green, this means that it's above the national average. Caregivers in your state want more than the national average. If the number is in red, this means it's below the national average. So caregivers want less than the national average. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave this up for a second here because I always find in the webinars this is where people are feverishly writing. And then I also want to note to everyone on the line today that we have completely free pay reporting available for all of our customers. So essentially we can enter in what you pay for both those companions resumes that don't have the CNA as well as the CNA. We enter in what your community zip code is, and we can email you a report so you can see where your pay ranks nationally. And if you're a customer today, we can put you in touch with your account strategist and they can go ahead and pull this report for you based on the latest data. If you're not a customer today, you want to test drive our services after the call, we can pull this report for you and we can help point you in the right direction. So if you want to see specifically kind of where a building ranks, we can help you do that. If you're on the line today and you have lots of buildings, we can do it across multiple buildings as well. It's pretty neat. And while we're on the topic of pay, we asked caregivers if they felt they could earn enough money to stay in the profession. And this one keeps me up at night. 24% of them said no. I think this is a really alarming number. We talked a lot about how the market isn't big enough. There's not enough caregivers. We're losing caregivers to retail. We're losing caregivers to fast food. We can't have a quarter of them leaving us because they can't make enough money. We need to find a way as an industry. It isn't an easy problem to solve. I think it's more all of us on the line and people in the industry coming together to put our heads together to say, how can we solve this? But we need to find ways to keep them working for us. And I'm going to ask you a quick question, and I'm going to launch a poll here, and you're going to understand why I'm asking this in a minute. But before I tell you why I'm asking this question, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. Do you have an Amazon warehouse within 30 miles of your community? All right, let me launch this poll here. And again, so do you have an Amazon warehouse within 30 miles of your community? And I see people are still voting here, so I'm going to leave it open just for another minute. Okay, great. I think we got most people. So really interesting. So 53% of you say that you do have an Amazon warehouse within 30 miles of your building. Why do I care about that? Why am I asking that question? I'm asking that question because this year, 10% of caregivers told us they've interviewed or worked for Amazon in the past. This is such a massive number. If you think about it, 10% is huge when you're talking about one company. And for those of you that don't have an Amazon in your market yet, know that Goliath is coming and they're coming for your caregivers. And I think when you're on the line and you're thinking about how can I get competitive, it's not, again, just about home care. Think about how to get competitive against Amazon. Amazon is holding regular hiring events in communities where they have a warehouse where they will strive to make 50,000 hires in a single day. They tend to pay 30% higher than retail. They are opening centers across the nation. So as of today, they operate 214 centers in the U.S. and 53% of you are within 30 miles of one of these centers. They are taking your caregivers. This is an alternative job for them. And so I think it's interesting when you as executives take a step back and say, how can I be competitive? Don't just look again at the building next door. Take a look at what other people are doing in your area that can hire your caregivers. Take a look at retail in your area. We can all recognize this, right? This is Target. Maybe you have a Target in your backyard. Maybe you don't, but all of us have some sort of retail in your backyard. And we take a look at well, what's retail doing? They're raising minimum wages, across the country. Target in particular, tons of press releases, big announcements about this. Retail, fast food, Amazon are soon going to shape how you recruit. So I hope if you take one thing away from the webinar today, it's really thinking about, who your competitors are and getting competitive and how you can get competitive outside your industry and inside your industry. A part of being competitive boils down to benefits, and this is one of my favorite parts of the session here called Battle of the Benefits. I feel like I need some Rocky Balboa music playing heading into this, but we put basically two benefits in front of a caregiver side by side, and we said, okay, if you were offered these two benefits, which one would you pick? Would you pick A or would you pick B? And I'm going to share with you exactly what they said. And there were some surprises for me. So we asked caregivers, what's more important? Earning a higher wage or health insurance? Hands down, higher wage one here. 63% said higher wage, 37% said insurance. Then we said, okay, what about health insurance versus paid vacation time? What's more important? 56% said health insurance and 44% said paid vacation time. We said, okay, what about paid sick time or paid training? About split down the middle. I thought this one was really interesting. Then we put next to each other, what about earning a higher wage versus getting the preferred hours and shifts that you want? So I'm not surprised to see higher, 57% said higher wage. But what I want you to take away here is actually the lower number on this slide. 43% of caregivers say it's more important to get the hours and shifts they want than making more money. You can use that. That's really interesting. Then we did 401k and paid vacation time. What's more important? I was fascinated by this one. 68% said 401k, 31% said paid vacation time. And we keep seeing this, like the concept of retirement savings, the concept that I can work and have a retirement is really interesting, regardless of whether they participate or don't participate in the program. From a pure recruitment standpoint, this is making waves, and I think it's fascinating. Then we said, okay, direct deposit and paid weekly. Thought this was interesting. I actually thought paid weekly would be more important, but it's not. Direct deposit was the benefit that kind of won the battle of the benefits here. So again, take out your pen and think about, are your benefits competitive? And if they're not competitive, are you focusing where you're going to make the most impact? So everyone can't leave the line today and go do all of these things, right? But you might be able to leave the line today and do one thing. And it's important if you're going to do one thing, if you're focusing on, where it's going to make the most impact based on what caregivers are telling us is going to make the most impact. This is straight from their mouth. Next here, we're going to look a little bit at processing times, and this is our last pillar of being competitive. We've looked at market, we've looked at pay, we've looked at benefits. Now I want to look at how you're moving caregivers through your recruitment process. Are you processing more efficiently than your competition? And so we asked caregivers, how long will you wait after an interview before interviewing with another company? And here's what they said. 27%, they're not going to wait. 27% are going to wait a few days. 35% said they're going to wait a week. And 11% said 2 weeks. That's nothing. Caregivers aren't in the business of waiting for a job offer. They are going to go after the opportunity that strikes the soonest and is the most interesting. If your job isn't the most interesting, or you're at the lowest kind of ranks of being competitive, you've got to be even better at processing candidates quickly than your neighbors. So I'm going to stop here and do another quick poll, and I'll share with the team here. How long does it take you to process a candidate? And when I say candidate, let's focus on caregivers and CNAs. How long does it take you to process a candidate after the interview before they start working their first shift? And let me go here and find this poll. Okay, launching the poll. So how long does it take you to process a candidate after the first interview before they can start working their first shift? And then I'm going to share some averages with you here. All right, just one more second, then I'm going to go ahead and close it. All right, great. So let me share some averages with you here. So this is what caregivers tell us. So we asked caregivers, how long does it take them after they interview to start working? So 20% of caregivers tell us they can get a job in 24 hours. 32% of caregivers say they can get a job within 3 days, right? So this is really quick. So 52% of caregivers tell us, and this isn't just like senior care, that they can start working within 72 hours. So 52%. Here's the problem, and this is a high number. Only 26% of you reported that you can process a caregiver within 3 days. But the problem is other companies can process them faster. So I think that's just really interesting to take a look at. And 27% of you on the line, so over a quarter of you on the line, said that it takes more than 2 weeks. So if you're taking more than 2 weeks right now to process a candidate, and you have 52% of candidates that can go get a job within 3 days, that's where you're losing them. And the problem is when there's not enough available talent in the market, you have to be super efficient at that recruitment process because there's not always more caregivers to go talk to, right? There might not just always be more new people to go talk to. So really thinking about and tightening and kind of buttoning up those recruitment processes is really, really important this year. 24% of caregivers, this leads to my next insight here, we asked caregivers if they feel they know the next step in the hiring process when they leave an interview, and 24% said they don't. 24% said they report that companies do a poor job of letting them know what the next step is in the hiring process. They go in for an interview, they don't know the next step. I don't know, is that a good interview? What's my next step? Am I moving forward? How many candidates are they interviewing? It's a lot of caregivers that could potentially be leaving your community and knowing what the next step is, that they don't know the next step. So I thought this was interesting and worth talking about today. Last section here, where I would really kind of dive in and have some dialogue with my staff is to start thinking about, do you process caregivers the second they leave for the interview? If not, could you? This is a huge, huge recommendation. You have a candidate come in, like you shouldn't be processing them an hour later. You should be processing them the second they leave. Can you shave any time at all off your current processing times? And I don't have time to go into it today, but huge case studies where I've seen organizations go from, 2 weeks to even 1 week or 1 week to 3 days. And all of a sudden they've got a lot more people coming in. And so think about and kind of outline what is my recruitment process today from A to B and think about if you can shave any time off there. And really important, make sure you have a good communication plan in place when caregivers come in for an interview to keep them engaged. So everyone has to run a background check and they take longer in different states and everyone has different orientation and training and processes. And as you can see in the results I shared, it takes everyone different times to get those caregivers onboarded and through their company. But everyone can have a really good plan to make sure that you keep those caregivers engaged. And I think that's really, really key here. If you go silent, keep in mind their phone hasn't gone silent. 3 companies on average are calling them a week, and that's where they're going to go. So the last portion of our session today, part of being competitive is really creating a positive experience for the caregiver, rolling out the red carpet, doing it better than the competition, and I want to talk about why. If a caregiver feels an interview is too long or too short, 14% said they're not going to be interested in joining your company. Part of a good experience is letting them know what to expect. And I'll tell you guys, no two interviews are alike. We work with thousands of companies across the country. We work with communities that have a 15-minute interview. We work with some that have a 5-hour interview. And I'm not exaggerating here. That is a real number. Caregivers don't know what to expect unless you tell them. We ask caregivers how long their interviews on average are. And here's what they said. 32% said under 30 minutes. Half said 30 to 45 minutes, 13% said an hour, and 5% said more than an hour. So I just ask yourself kind of like where you stand here. I would also ask yourself if 32% of communities across the country, their interviews are less than a half an hour, is that a long enough time to build a relationship with a candidate, make them want to work there, and make them feel valued? Maybe it is. Maybe you have a great process in place and they walk out feeling that love from your community, but it's fast. So I would think about if it is fast, like how can you really make sure that that's just an awesome experience? Next, we asked caregivers how many people they typically interview with. And here's what they said. 47% said they interview with one person, 46% said they interview with two people, and 7% said they interview with three people when they go into an office or a community for an interview. One of the insights that I thought was really interesting is that 87% of caregivers told us that they would be more interested in working for you if given a chance to meet and interact with some of your existing care team. Loved that. I think that's really interesting. No one's going to talk about what it's like to work for you better than your employees, and how cool is if an employer you can control those conversations, because I'm sure there's all employees that we would want them to talk to and employees that we wouldn't. But I thought this was really interesting. Commute times. We asked candidates how far they're willing to travel for a job interview. And here's what they said. So 37% of candidates, the majority, the biggest number here on the slide, said no more than 20 to 30 minutes. The second biggest number on the slide here is 15 to 20 minutes. So on average, about 70% of caregivers are not willing to travel more than a half an hour for a job interview or work. Job search with caregiver CNAs, it is hyper local. So you can't always control. Some of you on the line are like, well, I'm in a rural community. You can't necessarily control that, and there might not be enough caregivers nearby. I would highly consider like mileage incentives. We've seen them work before to help attract people that might live in another town or another city to commute in. But caregivers in general don't commute far for work because they don't have to. Like if you think about, you could plop yourself anywhere in the country and there's like lots of jobs around you. They don't want to travel far because they don't need to. And again, a lot of caregivers, female, kids, single parents, it's hard. So I think this is really interesting to think on. And part of standing out is making sure that caregiver feels comfortable during the interview. And 28% of caregivers told us that one of the most important factors when they're interviewing with an employer is that they feel comfortable while they're there. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is then we asked them, okay, well, what percentage ask you if you want something to drink? Only 37% said I'm offered something to drink when I go for an interview. Again, just think about like what that experience is when that candidate is with you, because that experience is going to help differentiate you. Going back to where we started, are you an Olympian brand? Are you a weak brand? Are you a clean slate? Like these are the small things that people are going to talk about. When we ask caregivers, what's a good interview experience look like? Here's what they said, and I thought some of these were interesting, and I wanted to share them with the group. The interviewer offered to pick me up a cup of coffee from Dunkin' Donuts because I had a long drive. How cool. So we know caregivers don't want to drive far for an interview. Like what a way to start building a relationship. I got to go on a company tour of the whole facility and meet people. Cool. Like as a building, like you have something to show. That's great. Candidates want to see that. And candidates don't always get that when they go to an interview with an assisted living. It's not part of everybody's process today. I just went on an interview and felt like I belonged there because they made me feel comfortable like I was at home. Cool. Interviewer made a personal connection and related to my situation as an unemployed person fresh out of college to her daughter in the same situation. Like they're connecting. It's relationship building. Like, could you do this too? Can you do this better than your competition? So again, pen time. A few things that I would ask you to think about after the webinar today is, are you setting those expectations before the interview? Does the caregiver know how long they're going to be there? Do you make caregivers feel welcome? Are your interviews in-depth enough to make them feel important? Can you make this experience any better as you think about how you're going to get competitive and what that get competitive strategy is? Do you have the right and enough incentives in place if your community is in a rural location? Okay, so just another couple of minutes here. I want to share a little bit just about like who we are. So HealthHire isn't just a research company. We're a recruitment company, and we have tools that can help you not only get more people through your door, but also tell your story and help be your partner here as you think about how you can get competitive. So for those of you that don't know us, I wanted to show you who we are, and I can connect you with those tools after the webinar today. So one of the biggest things that's really just unique about us is we can help companies reach candidates that you're probably not getting today and aren't applying through your jobs. Throughout all of our different web properties, we get thousands of people a day now that are visiting us for free training, free CNAs, CEUs, to research schools. We're job placement program for thousands of different schools and organizations across the country. We have the largest scholarship program in place for CNAs. So we have a lot of access to candidates in your local market that might not be reaching today, as well as we're really trying to attract more people into the profession. And so there's a great opportunity to connect with folks that just might not be applying to your jobs today. And I think that's something that's really unique. We deliver candidates to our clients in one of two ways. So one is career fairs. This is a single-day hiring event on site at your community. We don't come, but we're your promo engine. We get people there. You have a 15-minute meeting with us. You tell us what you need, what you have to offer. We find a date that works. We promote your special hiring event. We give you a call the day in advance with an estimated headcount, and you can hire as many people as you like. There's no staffing fees. And in fact, with this product, we've helped a lot of companies completely eliminate their staffing fees. Our other product here is our interview booking product. And essentially, this is an ongoing flow of candidates that are delivered to a community's door. And we line up candidates in slots of 20 booked interviews based on what you need and what you have to offer. And nationally, buildings make 4 to 6 hires out of every 20 booked interviews. And it's something that's flexible. You can turn it on, you can turn it off, you can put it at the communities that you need it. And it takes, just a few minutes to get it set up. And I can show you how to do that. But essentially, you go to healthhire.com. You see a form like this to schedule your interviews. You can fill out kind of what you're looking for, what experience is required, what shifts you're hiring for. After you complete this, someone from our team, your first time, will be in touch and walk you through how to log in, how to view your interviews, how it works, kind of get to know you a little bit more. And the cool thing is when we're talking to candidates, our goal is to screen them and make sure they're a good fit and really kind of sell you and what you have to offer as a building. And if we talk to a candidate and they say, no, I'm not interested in interviewing with that building, we ask them why. And we provide and bundle up all of this insight data back to you. And I think that's really interesting as you think about today, okay, I saw a lot here. How do I get competitive as a building? I don't know where I'm losing caregivers. With this product, we can come back to you and say, you know what, 30% of caregivers don't want to work for you, and here's why. And all of a sudden, you have some dials and you have some data, and you can start to understand where to focus. And so caregivers can come to us and say, I'm not interested now, maybe later, it's pay, it's shifts, it's reputation, whatever it is. All of a sudden, you have this data, and we can work with you to optimize the interview booking program, but you can also take this data and use it to optimize all of your different recruitment channels as well. And so I wanted to share that with you because I think it's really unique and kind of relevant to what we're talking about today. So I'm going to launch my last poll here in a second, and then I'm going to walk you through how to get access to our caregiver trend report here if you want more data. But I'm going to ask if you're open to trying something new, and if you need more caregivers or CNAs, resumes to hit your goals. This is my one ask in the webinar. If you found the content valuable, if you'd invite us to have a seat at the table to partner this year, to test with you, to have a conversation. I promise my team's not going to blow up your phone line, but if you do indicate that you're willing to sit down and kind of have a conversation with us, we're going to reach out today. We're going to find 15 minutes to show you interview booking and career fairs and how you could test it and pilot it at your location. So let me go ahead and launch this poll, and then I will go ahead and get you your follow-up material. So here we go. Launching poll. Are you open to having a conversation? Yes or no? Thank you very much. I see lots of yeses. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you for that yes. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it here in a second. All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much for all of those yeses. We will certainly reach out today and make sure that we get you connected. And to everyone that's not open to have a meeting right now, that's okay too. We're going to send you some follow-up materials as well. So after the webinar, you're going to get an email, so that way you can get a link to go and download a copy of the Caregiver Trend Report. And the Caregiver Trend Report covers a lot of the stuff that you saw here on the the webinar. So again, that's our annual report. So again, I want to thank you for joining the session today. I know there's a lot here and there's a lot to chew on, and it's really our privilege to serve you and to share some of these insights. Hope you found it valuable, and wish you so many successes in your business. And Andrea, if anyone has any questions, it doesn't seem like I can see those, Andrea, but I'm happy to answer anything that the attendees have.
Great. Actually, we don't have any questions because you must have done such a great job describing all the data. So thank you so much, Brandy. We'll be sending out a copy of a recording of the webinar to all the participants within about 24 hours. So I want to thank you, everybody, for coming. This is a great opportunity, and I want to thank you, Brandy, for all of your information and help.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And our goal is to get these links off to you before close of business today. So it's coming shortly to your inbox.
Great. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Take care.